Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You are welcome to this webinar. My name is Faith Okiror, and I'm going to be your moderator for this session. Now, we are having a webinar called Building Climate Resilience in the Ugandan Coffee Sector, and we are going to be sharing learnings from the Alliance for Resilient Coffee project. And it was a 4-year project that ran from October 2016 and ended in September 2020. Now, the YAC is a consortium of 7 organizations led by Hans R. Newman Stiftung, and the YAC project, was funded by USAID as part of the US government's food security initiative under the Feed the Future. Now, our webinar is going to be structured in such a way that we're going to have a 20 to 30 minute presentation. We're going to have a 20 to 30 minute presentation, after which we shall have a Q&A session, and then we shall have final remarks. By way of introduction, my name is Faith Okiror, and I work with the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture as a communication specialist. I have 10 years experience in communication and behavioral change, and I'm very passionate about climate smart adaptation. Our presenter for the day is Mr. Victor Komakech, who works with Hans R. Newman Stiftung as the ARC project manager in Uganda. Victor has over 15 years experience in development and is very dedicated to advocacy for climate change. Now, at this moment, I'm going to invite Mr. Victor Komakech for the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Faith, for the good introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking time to participate in this webinar. We hope it will be useful to you and to the organizations that you present. So let's start off with an understanding of what the ARC project is. So the USAID Feed the Future Alliance for Resilience Coffee project is a consortium of 7 leading non-governmental and research institutions working at the intersection of climate change to make coffee farming and sourcing operations climate smart. The ARC project was implemented as a pilot in 3 countries, that is Uganda, Guatemala, Honduras, over a period of 4 years, 2016 to 2020. The goal of the ARC project was to increase the resilience of smallholder coffee farmers to the impacts of climate change, with the overall objective to increase private sector engagement in climate smart agriculture in the target regions. Here, we present to you the 7 ARC project consortium partners and the roles each one played in the ARC project. In Uganda, the most active partners were Hans R. Newman Stiftung Africa, HRNS, International Institute for Tropical Agriculture, IITA, World Coffee Research, Conservation International, International Center for Tropical Agriculture, CIAD, and Root Capital, who funded the ARC project support budget for Ankole Coffee Producers Cooperative Union, ACPCU, which is one of our implementing partners in Ntungamo district in Western Uganda. We would also like to recognize the contribution of our partner in Uganda, Uganda Coffee Development Authority, and the entire Uganda National Coffee Platform for the support towards the work of the ARC project. Why the ARC project in Uganda? As we are all aware, in Uganda, over 1.7 million smallholder farming households are engaged in coffee production, while more than 5 million others are employed in the coffee value chain. This is evidence enough that coffee is a very important crop in Uganda, as it provides a source of livelihood and income to these many Ugandans. Coffee is also a major source of revenue for the country. This source of livelihood, however, is being threatened by climate change. Temperatures and rains are becoming increasingly unstable and unpredictable, leading to prolonged droughts, heavy rains, hailstorms, erratic and unseasonal rainfall. These climate hazards are affecting coffee production and quality. So in order to address the climate change challenge, the ACT project developed practical tools, approaches, and technologies for the private sector to facilitate adoption of climate smart practices at the base of their supply chains. In Uganda, the ACT project was implemented in 10 districts, covering both Robusta coffee growing regions and as well as Arabica coffee growing regions of the country. So here we shall discuss the ACT interventions in Uganda. Using the coffee and climate approach, the ACT project consortium partners collaboratively developed and tested practical approaches, tools, and technologies for climate change adaptation in the coffee sector. Before we proceed, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to present to you what is the coffee and climate approach. So the coffee and climate approach is a systematic and participatory approach to support coffee farmers' adaptation to climate change. And it comprises 5 steps, as you can see. The first step is setting the scene. This step allows for a quick look at how important climate change is in a given working context. Step 2 is assessment of climate change challenges, which creates an understanding of the impacts of climate change on coffee production and the livelihood of the producers. It also identifies suitable adaptation options to respond effectively to these challenges. Step 3 is planning, adaptation planning, which prioritizes adaptation options for a specific context and also structures their implementation process. Step 4 is validation and implementation of adaptation options, which offers different methods to facilitate implementation of climate smart practices. It stresses the importance of testing and validating the selected adaptation practices on a small scale before dissemination takes place. Step 5, lessons learned and understanding progress, which provides results, lessons, and evidences on which to base future adaptation approaches. In the middle of the coffee and climate approach, we have the coffee and climate toolbox, which is a compilation of information, guidelines, best practices, training, and other educational materials. including the different tools. Once we develop the different tools, you can always find them in the CRC toolbox after validation. This helps to inform, train, and empower different stakeholders towards building climate change resilience in the coffee sector. It works as a global learning platform for adaptation to climate change in the coffee sector. The Coffee and Climate Toolbox can be accessed through the website indicated on the slide. Gender, as we can see, is an integral part of all the steps of the coffee and climate approach, as the concerns of both women and men have to be taken into consideration. Different stakeholders are involved at all stages of the C&C approach. And these stakeholders, of course, include our coffee farmers, agricultural extension officers from both the government and the private sector. We have researchers, among others. This involvement of the stakeholders creates a strong sense of ownership of the approach and its related outcomes. Ladies and gentlemen, next we present to you the ARC project tools that were developed in the last 4 years of the project implementation. The 7 ARC partners combined their different expertise, knowledge, and skills to develop approaches, tools, and technologies to support climate change adaptation in the coffee sector. These tools are different steps and are available for uptake. As part of step 1 and 2 of the coffee and climate approach, 3 tools were developed to support climate risk assessment. And these tools include the climate risk country profile. This tool indicates key climate stressors and risks of different regions in Uganda. The tool also provides recommendations for climate smart actions to address those different stressors and risks. The development of this tool was spearheaded by CIAT and Uganda Coffee Development Authority with strong support from members of the Uganda National Coffee Platform. The other tool is the Landscape Assessment Framework, LAF. This tool provides a framework for assessing, measuring, monitoring, and communicating the status and trends in key indicators that collectively characterize landscape suitability. This includes natural capital, sustainable production, human well-being, and governance. A landscape assessment framework exercise was conducted in the Rwenzori region of Uganda, covering the districts of Kasese, Ibanda, and Kamwenge, headed by Conservation International and International Institute for Tropical Agriculture in collaboration with the Uganda Coffee Development authority. The other tool for climate risk assessment is the vulnerability assessment tool. This tool analyzes climate-specific vulnerability of farmers, identifying farmers who are in the greatest need of adaptation. And in this case, then, adaptation practices can be tailored to individual farmer households. This tool was applied in Luwero and in Tungam districts of Uganda. The development of this tool was spearheaded by HRNS. As part of step 3 and 4 of the coffee and climate approach, 2 farm level tools were developed, tested and validated. One is the climate smart investment pathway, which guides farmers to invest in climate smart practices in smaller, affordable packages, beginning with the simplest and the most affordable packages to the ones that require heavier investments. The tool breaks down the investment burden to enhance adoption. The development of the climate smart investment pathways tool, that is stepwise, was spearheaded by International Institute for Tropical Agriculture. The other tool is the on-farm technology trials. This tool tests predominant varieties against newer varieties in order, of course, under different climate smart practices, and it also provides an understanding of which varieties are most successful and profitable for farmers within different regions of the country. The development of this tool was spearheaded by World Coffee Research. Also, as part of step 3 and 4 of the coffee and climate approach, we have the climate smart agriculture implementation, which involves training and dissemination of these different tested and validated tools, practices, and technologies, using different extension approaches and methodologies. CSA implementation was spearheaded by HRNS. At this point, our moderator has some communication to make. Yes, Faith.
Thank you very much, Victor, for the presentation. At this point, I would like to quickly jump in and remind our participants to please send in your questions. Kindly type them in the Q&A section. You please give your name and your question. We remind you to please keep it short and simple. So all the questions are going to be attended to at the end of this presentation. Thank you very much. And I'd also like to inform the participants that we have Mr. David Mukasa from the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, who has been leading the project from the IITA side. He's the research associate at IITA, as well as Maureen Namgalu, who is the research agronomist from World Coffee Research, and they will both be supporting the Q&A session when the time comes. Victor, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Faith. So our dear participants, next we look at the results, the outcomes, and the impact of the ARC project in Uganda. So overall, the project reached over 1,500 smallholder coffee farming households who were trained on climate smart practices, over more than 900 training sessions, and these smallholder farmers that were trained have implemented climate smart practices on over 700 hectares of land. In order to promote adoption of climate smart practices, the project set up 74 demonstration plots on different climate smart practices. 36 on-farm technological trials were also set up, and 20 stepwise trial plots were also set up. And besides scientific data collection from the trial plots, these plots were also used as learning points for farmers through field days and learning visits. The results from the stepwise trial plots indicate that a farmer can realize about 50% increase in yield and income gain when all the different climate smart practices are applied on farm. The results also show us that there is no difference actually between the use of cultural and chemical methods in the control of the black coffee twig borer, which is the most disastrous pest of coffee in Uganda at the moment. We have also seen a reinstatement of the fly crop, that is the second season harvest, where farmers have adopted climate smart practices. For those of you who have been in the field with the farmers, you realize that the second coffee season, that's the fly crop, farmers were no longer getting any meaningful harvests from that season, the fly crop. But when a farmer applies all these different climate smart practices, we have seen in our project areas, the ARC project areas, that is actually reinstatement of yield harvest from coffee in this season. The OFCT trials are still ongoing in collaboration with the private sector, and we hope to have the results in the nearby future. So because of all these interventions, we have seen an increase in adoption of climate smart practices among the farmers that we have worked with by 51%. 71% of the farmers we have trained reported an increase in their coffee yields. During project implementation, we found out that women are really in a more vulnerable position in the event of climate change than men. This mostly stems from the gender inequalities in the responsibilities and roles of men and women in the family, farm organizations, and in their communities. Some of the inequalities include unequal labor distribution on farm, unequal access and control of key productive resources, technologies, including participation in training on climate smart agriculture practices. Women also have limited decision-making power within the farms, as well as in their farm organizations. To address these challenges, the ACT project piloted an intervention to integrate climate change, gender work in what we do. And this was done by, first of all, capacitating the extension team that we have on the field to be able to integrate concepts of household visioning and planning in the trainings at their farmer field schools. Each household is supported to develop and implement a gender and climate household plan, which further strengthens the adoption of climate smart practices at household level. The second intervention targeted farmer organizations to be able to increase women's participation in trainings and also decision-making and leadership positions. This was done by creating an understanding, first of all, between gender, understanding the link between gender and climate change, and the significance of women's contribution to the coffee sector, both at family and organizational level. It was also done by building capacity of the leaders to be able to identify the gender gaps in their different farm organizations and to design appropriate strategies to address them. As a result, we were able to train over 400 smallholder coffee farming households on household visioning and development of household plans. 74 farmer trainers were also trained as change agents to be exemplary first, in that they develop their own plans and implement them, and then go a step ahead to train and support other members of their farmer field schools to be able to do the same. Our results from this intervention shows that 1% of farmers trained developed joint household plans, and 75% had begun implementing their household plans. Ladies and gentlemen, we now present to you the key learnings from the project. The first one is the different ACT project partners. As you saw, the 7 different consortium partners of the ACT project brought on board different expertise, skills, knowledge, which was very useful in development of holistic and impactful approaches, tools, and technologies for climate change adaptation. From the gender and climate pilot that we did, we also saw that there is improved adaptation of climate smart practices, especially where households had joint visions and household plans. Then using the coffee and climate approach, which promotes participatory participation of different stakeholders, we have seen a strong sense of ownership of the project and its related outcomes. We also indicate here the different companies, private sector companies, that have actually already taken up these ACT project tools in their supply chains. Luwero District Local Government, where we have implemented the ACT project, has already adopted and included the climate smart investment pathways, that's the stepwise, in their 5-year development plan, 2020-2025, and beginning this financial year, they will support the scaling of the tool to other parts of the district. We are trying to lobby for the same in other districts as well. We also have collaboration on new projects, climate projects. HRNS will implement a new phase of the Initiative for Coffee and Climate, which is funded by International Coffee Partners, ICP, and the Swedish International Development Agency, that is SIDA, which will scale up some of the best practices and tools from the ACT project in the greater Luero region, and that is Luero district itself, Nakaseke, and Nakasongola. IITA, International Institute for Tropical Agriculture, is implementing the Enhancing Resilience and Adaptive Agricultural Livelihoods in Uganda project, which is funded by USAID, which will also scale up some of the best practices and tools from the ACT project in more than 12 districts across Uganda, inclusive of 4 districts in northern Uganda, 2 districts in eastern Uganda, 4 districts in central Uganda, and 2 districts in western Uganda. World Coffee Research will continue to work with the National Coffee Research Institute to make climate smart or climate resilient coffee varieties available to our coffee farmers. Dear participants, thank you for listening to me, and allow me to hand back to our moderator to take us to the next activity of the webinar. Faith, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Victor. It has been a very insightful presentation, and I'm sure other participants will agree with me. Now we have reached the Q&A session of our webinar, and I see that we have several questions that have already come in and are still coming in. At this point, I'd like to remind participants to please type in your question in the chat section, in the chat section, in the Q&A section, and these will be answered accordingly. I'd also like to remind participants that we have Maureen Namugalu from World Coffee Research and David Mukasa from the International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, who are going to be supporting during this Q&A session. Now we have our questions. I'm going to read out 3 questions that will be answered, and thereafter I'll read the next 3 questions as well. Our first question, I believe, is directed at David Mukasa, and it reads, how has implementation of climate smart practices and a stepwise influenced coffee productivity? We also have a second question for Maureen that reads, how can farmers access information from the OFTT trials about which improved varieties are best? We also have another question that reads, and I believe this is for you, Victor, where can the tools be got? Okay, so we're first going to have those answered, and then we shall read the rest of the questions. Thank you. So I'll start with David, then we'll go with Maureen, and then Victor last. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Faith, for moderating this session. Yes, how the CS has influenced productivity. We can see that implementation of CS practices improved the coffee vigor, and also through improving the coffee vigor, there was that the primary branches, length of the primary bearing branches increased, and also the CS practice also reduced the the black coffee twig borer. That is already, as Vix has mentioned, that is devastating. So we increased the practice of CSA practices in stepwise, realized that there was a reduction in BCTB infestation that also boosted the coffee productivity. And also CS practices like mulching and manure application retained enough moisture. I think those are the attributes that contributed to the increase in coffee productivity that we are reporting on today. Thank you very much, Faith.
Thank you, David. Welcome, Maureen. Please answer the question, and then we'll go to Victor next.
Yes, thank you, Faith. Yeah, in address to the question of how the different farmers can access the information from the OFTTs, when you look at these OFTTs where they were established in the different regions, basically it was under Arabica regions, and we were able to establish them in these different regions where Arabica coffee is being grown. This to mention that is Kasese, Kanungu, we have the West Nile, then we have the Elgon region. So that is where most of the Arabica coffee is taking place. So within these OFTTs, we organized farmer field days where different farmers that are hosting trials within these specific regions, we are able to call the farmers to see what is happening on these respective OFTTs. So other farmers that we are not participating in these OFTTs are able to learn about the different climate smart practices that are being implemented on these OFTTs alongside the improved varieties. And at the end of it, all different farmers can be able to access the knowledge from these OFTTs. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Victor, please go ahead now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith. Thank you very, very much, Faith. The tools that we just talked about can be accessed through the Coffee and Climate toolbox that I mentioned when I was discussing the Coffee and Climate approach. The website is www.toolbox.coffeeandclimate.org. We shall share this presentation, and then you can just look at the slides which discusses the C&C toolbox. Then you will be able to access it. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. Now, again, to remind participants, please keep the questions coming in. Keep them short and simple. We have a number of questions that are still coming in. Please go ahead and ask them. Now, for our next questions, I'm going to ask another 3 questions that will be answered, and we'll go on to the next 3. This goes to David. Is there a documented return on investment that can support a business case? And another question, what is the cultural method? Or what is the cultural method and chemical method followed for the control of BCTB? And also we're going to ask, is there information on the yield increase at each step of stepwise? Okay, so we're going to have this answered, and then, okay, one more. We're going to have these questions answered, and then we'll come to the next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Faith. On returns on investment, this is still work in progress. We are drafting a stepwise paper, but so far the result we have is that when you invest, the entire CSA package is applied, it shows 17 to 25% returns on investment. So that means when you invest, for example, in Uganda, if you invest one shillings, you're likely to receive back 17 shillings or 25, depending, because now, for example, we had 2 sites. One site was using the entire package to using fertilizer, even using inorganic fertilizer. It was Ruwero. Then we had one site that was only using manure, up to manure, applying up to manure application, organic manure. So that's why there's that difference of 17.25%. So yes, investment in CS practices have good returns on investment. Now, moving to the next question about culture method that we used. We used that is trimming and burning the infested twigs, coffee twigs or primary branches. And we every 28 days, we are following, because now, for example, we are just following the life cycle of BCTB, which within that, so that, okay, we could time it before the BCTB insect would move out to attack other primary branches. We could trim them off and burn them. For the chemicals, we're using imida, corporate, and Orias. Because we're using 2 chemicals, we're combining 2 chemicals, one for contact, and both of them were systemic pesticides. Because now BCTB has 2 components. First of all, the BCTB itself as an insect, but also the food, because it carries a fungus to feed its young ones. So that fungus is responsible for the wilting of the twigs. So that's why we combined the 2 pesticides to eliminate. First of all, one pesticide was eliminating the fungal growth, another one was eliminating the insect, the BCTB. So this chemical application was done on monthly basis, okay, 10 times per year. We just skip only 2 months. And when we compared the results from both culture and chemical, we couldn't see any difference. One of the reasons could be I can give is that now, for example, some farmers, the neighboring farmers were reluctant to control BCTB. Definitely using chemical at times may not be as effective given the environment where we're working from. So, and in that case, I would recommend that farmers continue using culture methods, which are cheap to apply than using chemical. Chemicals are very expensive, especially the imida. Crop rate is very expensive, and very few smallholder farmers can afford using it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Now we have one question. We have a question answered yet, and is there information on yield increase at each step of stepwise?
Yes, there is increase in each step. If we compare, because in our setup, when we're setting up these demo sites, we had a control. But if you compare the yield that we're getting from the control, relating it to the different steps, we can see there was an increase in yield. But overall, the yield increase was most significant in step number 4, where the entire CSA package was applied. When we compared the yield from control, where we are only weeding, plus when it's compared with the yield in step number 4, where the entire package was applied, we could see yield increase of 50%. So yeah, but each step there was an increment on yield when you compare it with the control that we had. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. Now, the next three questions, we have: what were the actual on-farm practices and infrastructure that were introduced to the farmers? This, I believe, goes to Victor. And then also we have a question: you have reached 1,548 smallholder farming households. Do you have a statistical breakdown of the female-headed households and other vulnerable category? Also to Victor, how receptive were the farmers to the practices introduced? And was there any bias towards adoption of some practices to others? If so, what were the reasons? And just one more. Comparing the number of households and the acreage they work, did you observe any drawbacks due to this ratio? Okay, so Victor, I think these are all for you. Then we'll go to the next set of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Faith. About the actual on-farm practices, infrastructure that were introduced to the farmers. We had, for specifically climate change adaptation, we had practices like adoption, soil erosion control, using different methods, trenches, and others. We also had rainwater harvesting and simple irrigation. Then we also promoted the use of mulching, shade trees, especially those recommended by our research institution in Uganda, Nakori. We also promoted improved coffee varieties, also in collaboration with Nakori. Currently, we have the 10 coffee wilt resistant varieties, and that's what we are promoting with our farmers. We also promoted cover crops, especially 3 types of cover crops. We have the lab, we have the green leaf desmodium, and then we also have the Indigofera spicata. We also promoted rejuvenation, focusing on stamping specifically, because according to research, young plants are more resilient to the impacts of climate change. And of course, also looking at the yields that the farmers are able to get. But these practices cannot be promoted without looking at agronomy, the basic agronomic practices. So however much you promote those, without the agronomic practices, then you will be wasting your time. So practices like weeding, desuckering, manuring or nutrition, and pruning were also part and parcel of what we promoted. The second question was from, about the households, women-headed households. We have 31% actually of the total number of farming households reached that are female-headed. Then about how receptive were the farmers to the practices introduced? Yes, the reception, of course, varied, and that also speaks a lot to the adoption levels that we've seen. One is that farmers take a slow pace when you introduce something that is completely new to them, and they are not, it's not their usual way of doing things. And then also looking at the cost of some of the practices, that has also made some of the farmers, somehow go slow on some of the practices. For example, when you talk about mulching, they will tell you it's quite expensive to buy, mulch. When you talk about the improved coffee varieties, they will tell you, the local varieties, we sometimes receive them for free from government. And then if we are to buy them, it is about 300 shillings, Uganda shillings. then the improved varieties are actually 1,500,000 Uganda shillings. So it's quite difficult for farmers to, so it takes a bit of time. We have also seen practices like stamping, which is quite good, both for climate change adaptation and for increase in productivity. The farmers also go slow on that because they will definitely lose production for some time before they start seeing the increase in yields and all that. So all these were dependent. So some of the practices were easy for the farmers to take up and others were a bit difficult. But it also all depends on the need that the farmer also has on farm. What are the major problems and what are the major needs that they can take on? So, yeah, I don't know if I've answered all of them. Thank you. Back to Faith.
Thank you very much, Victor. You have indeed answered all the questions that were posed earlier. Unfortunately, this is all the time we had for this webinar. We have now come to the end of the webinar. However, all questions that have been asked and have not been answered are going to be answered right back. We are going to have we're going to have the presentation, the link to the recorded presentation shared, as well as other resources. And then we are also going to have the link to the toolbox shared with all the participants. Please note that all the questions are going to be answered within this week by Mr. Victor Komakech, by Maureen, and by David Mukasa. Victor's email is right now on your screens. You can please send him the ones that you've not asked, but all the ones that have been asked are going to be sent back. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you and goodbye.